Hello, heroines. This is Alex, and we are back again for yet another interview. And today I am delighted to bring the lovely Sandra Hunter. Sandra, how are you?
Doing great. It's good to be here, Alex.
So nice to have you here. We were just chit-chatting before and catching up a little bit. Um, for those people who do not know you, for the heroines who do not know you, tell us a little bit about who is Sandra?
Yes, good question. That's something that I'm still in the
Have you,
process of
have you
discovering.
figured it out yet?
Like most of us, it's a kind of a process that is more accelerated at sometimes than others, which is just I don't know what's going on. But I come from academia. I taught at a college in Southern California for about 19 years. And during that time, I noticed that particularly my young women students, really well qualified, so enthusiastic, wildly intelligent and communicative, would score the interview, get the job, and face the same race and gender bias in the workplace that we have faced for decades and decades and decades. And it felt to me that there was no real support system between the educational institution and the beginning of a young person's career. So that was the first thing I started noticing. It was just, we need mentorship and we need it early and often. And the women that I've talked to while I've been conducting my business have said, I wish I'd had a mentor. I just wish I'd had someone to speak to. So the business sort of started morphing. I moved from education because I passionately want to do something about the issues of inequality and the stagnation of the career trajectory for many women, and not just young women, but women in all stages of their careers. And this comes from external narratives, microaggressions from, being peripheralized, being promoted to fail, the glass cliff, the double bind, you're too loud, you're too aggressive, hey, you're not speaking up enough, we don't hear from you. But all of those messages are external. So it eventually became very clear that we need to start focusing on internal messages, which is who you are, your identity. So that became the center of the business that I now have, Empower Her. And that's what I launched on about 3 years ago.
It's been 3 years already.
I
Wow,
know, I know. I can't believe it.
that's
We've been through
amazing.
some sort of renaming and re-identifying the business thing, as we got closer and closer to what we wanted to work on. But this is where we are now.
But and it's interesting because I think like everything else, it's a journey, right? We
Yes,
go into business wanting to support and to serve, and we have to find our way, right? And
absolutely right.
you've done that with your biz, I've done that with mine. And I think that coming out of a relationship
Hmm.
is very much the same, right? We're like, okay,
Absolutely. Yeah.
who do I want to be? How do I want to move forward from here? Um, and I love what you said about the external messages or external narratives versus the internal messages.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I feel like women are, women can't win in some
Hmm.
ways
Yes.
because you're either too sexy, not sexy enough, too fat, too skinny, too beautiful, not beautiful enough. It's like
Hmm.
you sit at these extremes in the whatever spectrum,
Hmm.
and it's like you're doing the splits all the time. So how do you how do you
Exactly.
manage that?
Right. And let's just look at the example of a woman walking in to give a presentation, all right, or even conflict resolution. She will immediately be judged on what she's wearing. Is it designer? If it's designer, we're paying her too much. If it's not designer or she didn't prepare enough, the minute she opens her mouth, she's judged if she has anything other than received pronunciation. All of that before she's got to the content. And if she has some regional accent, her content will be judged as unintelligent. And we have case studies to support this. So, you're struggling all the time. And I just want to go back to a point you raised, which was really important about how we change in our businesses. And we change in our businesses because we're getting closer and closer to understanding who we are individually. And that reflects really positively and powerfully for the women that we work with. So going back to your question about what changes with change of partnership, separation, uncoupling, I think you call it. And I really like that phrase. That's again another external narrative. Your divorce, your marriage tends to create an identity around you that may not actually fit, or you believe it will at first because you so want that. You so want to be coupled. You so want to identify with something else. And I think that's the mistake a lot of us make, is that we confuse our identity with our marriage. So that when we do become uncoupled, it feels like there is what's left, who am I? Because we've identified so closely with kids or without kids, with pets, with, all that stuff that goes together to build up. Basically, you create a fantasy, you join with some other person and you agree to create this fantasy around yourselves for safety, for comfort, for security, right? So you have little pet names for each other, you have funny voices. There's a couple of friends of mine, when they go into a supermarket, they might become separated because they're looking for stuff. And one of them will have a bird call that she uses. And then the other one will call back, and that's how they find each other, which is very cute, and I think there are other examples of that. But it also gives you this sense of who you are. And some of those things of who you are really productive and positive. They can enhance your sense of confidence and the ability to pursue a career, but sometimes it can undermine it, particularly if you get into the bind where you are supposed to be the career woman, but you're also supposed to take care of the children and look after the house and be the hostess and so when you become uncoupled, it's just you've lost who that is. Anyone who is pregnant and has a child will tell you the massive change that goes on when all you do after you have a child. Well, first of all, your body is kicked to heck and back, because the baby will take what it needs, never mind you. You're like a husk at the end of your pregnancy. But then your brain goes through all these hormonal changes, and of course, all your focus is on the baby or babies. And then when you go to the park, you're so desperate for reasonably intelligent conversation that you'll pigeonhole the first person and talk them into the ground, because we're not just one thing. And yet society forces us into that mold. So for my divorce, when I became uncoupled, it was horrendous and it was a massive relief.
And that's the thing, right? It's not just one thing. It sucks to hell and back,
Mm-hmm.
but it's such a beautiful gift if we give ourselves the permission to look at it that way and to dig
Yes,
into kind of that icky stuff
right.
to really rediscover who we are.
That's such a great point. Just thinking about the coming out of the marriage, you feel as though you're being judged. Even if you're not, even if your friends are very supportive, you feel, and that's the societal pressure, that's the external pressure that revamps your identity. Social media, right? Marketing, all of that is targeted to make you feel something. You're not, you could, if you were just slightly better, if you just drank Bud Light, I don't know why I thought Bud Light, but if you just did that, you would be this better person. Those are the external narratives that can destroy you. I love your point about becoming creative, about divorce. Divorce is an opportunity for you to completely revamp how you perceive yourself, instead of as the person that everybody else has perceived you to be, as wife, as mother, as lover, as, all these things that we're supposed to be. And that translates over into your professional environment as well. So, it's not just one thing, not one place.
So take that, what you just said, it translates into your professional environment as well. Take that further for us.
Okay, so if you've become uncoupled and you're in the workplace, largely this is unacknowledged grief. This is disenfranchised grief. You are walking around with that. It's as though you're wearing a suit of armor, and you are absolutely impacting your professional growth, your power, and your clarity, the three pillars of how you accelerate your professional trajectory. So that let's just look at those. So what is professional power? Professional power is the skills, the expertise, the education, the knowledge you bring to your job, right? And you're incredibly acute about all of that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have got the job. Your clarity is your perception of your career, how you see it moving forward in 6 months, a year, 10 years, whatever it is. Your clarity also refers to your ability to for your body to respond to people. Now, we always, we think of ourselves in our cognitive intelligence, right? Our body's intelligence is what keeps us safe from walking out into traffic. It will also be, if you are a woman of color walking into a 98% white male room, you will signal desperately for the only other person of color in the room, or you will find yourself backed up against the wall. You can read, your clarity also goes to how you present yourself in a presentation. One simple thing is having your chin up instead of your chin down. Knowing how to respond to people who speak to you, knowing how to go into mediation or conflict resolution or interviewing a new client or dealing with your boss or, getting your team to be energized and, for this particular project you're doing. All of that requires clarity, including, dealing with other cultures, other, abilities and all of that. If you're walking around with this grief of being uncoupled, it will be like trying to play the harp while you're wearing mittens. Everything is muffled. And because of that, your professional growth, relying on your power and your clarity, is then completely affected. So that this grief that is, you're judged and blamed because work is performative, right? And work is performative, home is performative, right? So you're supposed to do all these things, take your kid to a cello lesson or to a birthday party, or you have a work deadline. And so we tend to back pocket what's going on in uncoupling. And so it stays in stasis. And something that we talked about initially was that instead of being able to see divorce as an opportunity or uncoupling as an opportunity, we stay blighted with the initial emotional impact. And that initial emotional impact will be compounded by other griefs that you haven't released. So all of that interferes with you professionally.
So I want to stay on the grief piece a little bit because everybody grieves differently and there is no timeline on grief. It looks different for everyone. But the one thing is, for us to move forward, we have to grieve and we can't stay stuck in the grief. What has worked for you, or what have you seen work for other women in terms of being able to grieve the their own uncoupling? I'll give you an example. For me, my grieving came before the uncoupling because it was my decision to leave. And before I made that decision, I grieved the relationship that it would never grow into. I grieved the children I would never have. I grieved all kinds of different things. And by the time I was ready to leave, my grief kind of had passed, let's say, or I had worked through it because I had all this time to think and to make my decision. Not everybody's like that. So what are some of the things that you've seen in terms of what are some of the ways that people can get through that, or women can get through that grief?
Just want to hop back to something that you talked about, which was you had been through this, you looked ahead to what was coming. So that's termed anticipatory grief. Okay, so it's just a way of, okay, I'm looking ahead to what's going to happen, but I'm also aware of the fact that I'm losing some things here. So there's a little bit of a conflict there that's going on. You asked me, what have I found? let me just take us back to mid 20th century after World War II, when expressing grief was basically frowned on by the governments. The governments from after World War II, Europe, the UK, and the US, we were told, do not show your grief because our boys are coming back from the front. So you have the elimination of ritual around grief. Now we have funerals and memorials. We had a lot more prior to the wars.
Interesting.
It was very much more, seen. People would touch their collars in respect when a hearse went by. People would sometimes kneel. There would be ritual around grief that vanished. So children weren't permitted to go to funerals. When somebody in the family died, grandpa has gone away. So now we have generations of people growing up without any ritual or very little ritual around grief, who don't know how to deal or face their own grief. And they don't know how to deal or face other people's grief. So we're all in this awkward space of not knowing what to do. And we know we'll have to deal with it, but we really don't want, nobody wants to be in grief, right? So the idea for me was to reintroduce ritual. So to make something, so you can clay model, you can collage, you can write, you can sing, you can dance, you can have something that is a ritual. And you can have your angry dancing and thank God you're gone kind of dancing, and all that stuff is relevant. But once you make it into a ritual, we are creating positive neural pathways in our brain, whereas we are negatively stuck in feeling sorry and feeling sad. Once you are actively engaged with externalizing the grief, you can become way more creative about it, because you've made a buffer for yourself between the inciting incident, the separation, and how you can now view it from a better perspective. You've externalized it from your body. You need to externalize what's going on. And very often people just walk around with this big typhoon going on inside of them. And it has, they don't know how to let it out, or they freeze it into a box and bury it, which is called backpocketing grief or delayed grief. So by learning to externalize it, you give it a shape, and you make space in your body. It moves out of your body. And that's when you can become creative.
And it doesn't have to be expressed in front of others. It's just us being able to basically express it out of our
Yeah.
body.
Yeah. And I feel very strongly about expressing grief in front of others. It's something that some people are comfortable with, and some people are not. When you're going through something like an uncoupling, you're told, oh, go and see a counselor, go and go to group, you may not have the language at that point. Or what I've seen in group is that you adopt somebody else's language because you're so terrified you don't really know what to say. So externalizing it in a creative medium, and we work with, doing it through crafts and arts and, knitting and, collage, all that stuff. It begins to give the grief a shape that is out of your body. Once you get it out of your body, then you can start looking at it much more creatively.
And I would say objectively, right? Because your body is not holding on to all of those
Right.
emotions.
Right. And also to understand, I mean, very, very, very good point, Alex, that you're not holding on to it. That's crucial. And to understand that part of this may be epigenetic. So generationally, it might have been in the family that there was this type of mourning that went on. And if you think about the fact in America right now, anybody living in America has an association with slavery. There is the grief associated with that. The grief associated with colonialization the world over, whether you were the perpetrator or the victim, you were similarly affected. If you see somebody in pain, you feel that pain too. But this epigenetic grief that's passed on may make it, that uncoupling even more painful, because you're still holding epigenetic grief from your mother, from your grandmother, from your great grandmother, who may have gone through similar things.
Yeah, we don't often talk about generational grief, right? But it is very much a part of
It's
us.
huge. It's huge. Your epigenome is formed soon after your genome. So strands of DNA, this is the very basic version of this. Strands of DNA wrap around proteins and either enhance or suppress traits. And there is a book by Mary Frances O'Connor called The Grieving Brain that looks at the neuroscience of grief. Amazing book. It talks about literally where the grief is located in your brain. So in your hippocampus, in your parietal lobes, in your prefrontal cortex, all of that is how grief is processed in the brain. And the brain goes into complete denial when you're going through this stuff. And so it's in conflict with itself. You lose balance. Some of the people I've worked with have literally fallen to their knees when they're going through these terrible times. So it's good to understand that you have in your epigenome, you might have all the, for example, hypervigilance, depression, anxiety, as well as Parkinson's and all the other ones that we're beginning to understand are passed on epigenetically. The good thing about knowing this is that you can do something about it, because instead of facing shortened life expectancy, you can actually deal with going through an uncoupling in a practical and grounded and sympathetic way, so that you can release that from your body, because it's what you don't release that gets passed on to the next generation.
Amazing, amazing. I so want to like just keep digging because I feel like you and I could talk for hours.
We always
Um,
do.
we do, don't we?
We do.
Um, what would you say in your own personal history? What would you say was your single biggest lesson from your uncoupling that can serve the heroines in the group?
I was 65 when I separated. And at this end, this end of the spectrum here on the life expectancy, it's just, there's not a lot of time left, right? So there was a sense of despair at first. Why am I doing it so late in life? There's nothing for me. But then I started a business. I'm still grappling with it and learning the different things that it's teaching me, but it's going really well. I mean, the people that I'm meeting are astonishing, and they give me back a sense of myself. But also, I've started dating, and it was just, okay, so 3 years ago, I was, crawling through the debris of my marriage. And now I was terrified. Online dating, it was just, no. My daughter kicked me into it. It's okay, we're going to set this up now. And here's the pictures of you. We did that. And it was a little bit difficult for the first year. But now I'm dating somebody and we get on really well together. And it feels like it's not going to be, oh, I'm going to be with this person for the rest of my life. This person has showed me the joy that comes through understanding and accepting yourself as who you are, instead of being with someone who doesn't.
And just that. I mean, I understand, we talked about earlier about external validation or external, what did we say, narratives versus
Right.
our internal dialogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we become really strong and really have a good conviction about who we are, and that comes after we do the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
After we've gone through the grieving, after, like me, after I was done with it's all his fault and I did everything I could to save
Yeah.
the marriage, it was like, okay, so
Yeah.
let's get real. What
Yeah.
was my role, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after, we go through all of that, it's dang it, I lost my train of thought. Um,
Well, while you find it again, I want to go back to that
Go
lovely
for
thing
it.
that you said, which was taking agency.
Mm,
And so often we feel this has all been done to me, but you get the choice to say, well, I don't want that thing that was done to me. I want something different. When women start making their own choices, everything changes. And the thing that you said about strength, we step into strength. We always had that. We always had the resilience. We always had the ability to, to burn it down and start something else, to step away into a different perspective. We can do all of that. We always had it. And we get somehow convinced by external narrative, and that includes social media and marketing, that we are not that. And once you start learning that, there are so many exercises, workshops, programs that will teach you how to stand in your own strength. And Alex is one of them. Everybody here is doing this great work. You are unstoppable, and you don't realize that because you've been trapped in something that's told you a story that isn't true. It's not your story, it's someone else's.
It is. And what I was going to say is not coming back, so I'm just going to let it go. But having that internal conviction is really what begins it all.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I was going to say. When we have that internal conviction, and on top of that, we meet somebody and we have a partner who sees us
Mm,
for the amazing human that we are, even though sometimes we may not see it because they have obviously their perspective. But
right.
it's like icing on the cake.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
It's that
icing and sprinkles and chocolate and cherry and everything.
gold and all the rest of it, champagne. I mean, I think that's such a valid point, Alex, because that's why I think, as much as we're saying here, you need to step into your power. You have so much power. I mean, we can say that stuff. It's very difficult for women who are going through the grit, right? That's why you need a team. Every woman needs a team. And you need your people, not just in the home environment, your friends. You need a professional team as well to help you. So you need people you can speak to openly. And there are ways of doing this. And, I'm happy to talk about that at some other point. But you need that team. You need mentors. You need sponsors. You need people who believe in you, because it's very difficult to do this work by ourselves. All you need is one person saying, they didn't give you the promotion. They do not know what they lost. And you go, yes, yes, I'm brilliant. They just lost an opportunity here. And that's all it takes for you to shed that, instead of going over and over it. What did I say wrong? What did they ask me? It's just, I can shed that. I'm on to the next thing. Let me step through the next portal.
Yeah, and I feel like the key to that is how we look at things, whether we look at things, and you and I were talking about that before, from a
Yeah.
place of judgment versus a place of curiosity. If we can
Yes.
get curious about what is happening, why we've gone through what we've gone through, why do I feel this way? Our struggles, it
Mm-hmm.
takes on a different dimension because we're not judging. When we judge, we keep things small and in a box.
Yes.
When we get curious, we open everything up, and that's where we really figure out what we're made of.
I think one of the things that changed for me was that I learned to welcome in my failed marriage into my life,
Mm.
and to be tender with it, and to tell it, okay, here you are. I see you're showing up again. Sit down. Let's talk about the pain. I know you're going through pain. Let's talk about that. And being gentle with that reflects to the gentleness that you have towards yourself and to other people around you. Just that step, instead of pushing it away, burying it in a box, welcoming it back in, and seeing the shape it takes. And it will always be part of your life. It's not that you're going to throw it overboard and walk away from it. You learn so much about yourself in this marriage that's invaluable for you. But you can make friends with an uncoupling.
Yeah, and I also feel like we learn so much when we go through hard stuff, right?
Yeah.
When it's like when you run a project at work, um, if everything's running smoothly, you never go back to say, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, right? When
Right.
when stuff starts going sideways, that's when you're like, okay, how do I not do that again, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I like that very much.
So figuring out after we go through an uncoupling with,
Mhm.
trying to understand, okay, what happened? How did I contribute? It's never, it's 50-50, unless you have extreme situations where
Mhm.
there's physical abuse or there's violence or anything like that, because nobody invites that in. Um, so it's um, getting to be curious about
Exactly.
what we're
Exactly.
feeling instead of, you know, hiding it away somewhere.
And I just want to go back to the point that you raised about people who are in abusive marriages. That's when you start looking at epigenetic. You didn't start this.
Yeah.
This is not because of you. And once you have that perspective, it's just light bulb time. I remember when I first told my daughter that I was, her father and I were separating, she was upset. But then afterwards, she said, now I understand why every single relationship I've had has been so bad. And it was just, yes, that's exactly. I was telling you one thing, I was modeling something else.
Yeah. And that's what you just said is absolutely key because people key in on our behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
the things that we do. It's one thing to say something, it's another thing entirely to live it and
Yeah.
to be it.
Yes,
And
exactly.
when there's dissonance between what we say and um, how we show up is always going to beat out what we say,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally
hands
agree.
down.
Yeah.
So
Okay, we've solved it.
I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story and your incredible wisdom with us.
Thank you.